Wait.
You should. Let me out in a second.
Huh? It's raining here. No. Kind of. You are right.
That's a great street. Yes.
Simple operation. This thing I will throw it away. I know I've already done it, so just throw it out. Computer I don't have, it's too expensive to be made. But I decided not to move. I stayed the simple Nokia, so you can throw it away.
Actually, it's a good weapon.
So I'm going to show you the neoclassical macro model. And I'd say you just have to find out where you should remind me not to forget the pen drive.
I will.
What the master thing
Okay. So this is the standard neoclassical Keynesian model, and you'll get this because I'm going to set it because I have a bunch of stuff. Is called the Higgs-Hansen ISLN model. Okay. So you can see you start from the standard Keynesian equation, income, disposable income. This is y, okay, you see then y becomes y, so forget it. But anyway, disposable income is equal to consumption plus investment plus net government expenditure. You see it here, okay? Then it is assumed that income demand is equal to supply, so this is it. Income is equal to consumption plus savings plus taxes. Investment equal to saving, that's the standard thing we went through. And this is the 45-degree line, remember? That we talked about, that's it, okay? That was done by Hansen, the guy called Hansen, Alvin Hansen, a professor of economics at Harvard University. That he produced the 45-degree line. Okay, there we go. This is the standard consumption function. Here they put a constant simply to make it straightforwardly linear, right? I only used this one. They make linear. This is the same. Mathematically, it's the same thing. Then all that stuff, the zero means the starting point. It's all unnecessarily verbose here. Then we get exactly to the same C1 minus C. That's exactly what we produced so far. Then this is just the expansion. This here is the expansion in Taylor series. So that's the action of the multiplier. It's okay. Then the difference of the increase in income is due to a function between the demand and the supply for output. Since you already have all the neoclassical elements coming in, this is not okay. Here with the ISLM comes. Here it is. So this is Higgs. This from here we start with Higgs. Okay. So, what does Higgs do? As I told you, Higgs says, look, I did not understand the language of Keynes. I didn't understand. But what I understood is that he is that he's saying that there is a unemployment equilibrium, that the system can actually be at equilibrium with unemployment, so that equilibrium and full employment don't necessarily coincide, okay? So I'm going to translate, and I'm going to use Keynes, because Keynes used the marginal efficiency of investment schedule that goes down. So what Higgs does, he says, okay, investment, okay, is a function, investment here, okay, this is investment. So this is an autonomous investment. This is kind of independent. Autonomous means independent. It stays there, it's autonomous, okay? You follow me? Autonomous expenditure. It's very important. In the Keynesian framework, there's always there's some element of autonomous expenditure. Autonomous meaning it's independent of other things. Operates like a constant. Do you follow me? In the system. And plus the investment is a function of the rate of interest. So you have autonomous investment, and there's an investment which is a function of the rate of interest. Follow? You see here? You see? Okay. Blah, blah, blah here, not important. Here it's important.
So sorry, the one with the zero would be the
autonomous, yeah, which is independent of the rate of interest. Huh?
I mean, both variables make.
No, I0 is not a variable; operates as a constant.
It's a constant.
It's a constant. Okay. Then investment. You see, IR. That investment which is dependent on the rate of interest is negative. It means that higher the level of the rate of interest, lower level of investment. Do you follow? That's exactly the marginal efficiency of investment schedule. Do you agree with me on that? Because in the first graph that I put, look at my finger. In the first graph that I put on the blackboard, marginal efficiency of investment goes down. So the higher, here is the rate of interest, here is the level of investment. If I draw this, the higher the level of investment, the higher the level of the rate of interest, the lower the level of investment. Okay, so that's exactly it. So this is Keynes. Okay, so investment. Then substitutes, blah blah. Not that good. Stocks. Okay, then there is another function here which I cut short through this, so you can read it. Is savings. So savings and investment are equal. They start from the assumption of equality. But savings, Hicks makes savings positively related to the rate of interest. Do you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Savings are positively, in Hicks, positively related to the rate of interest. So Hicks has two functions. Investment, negatively related to the rate of interest. It's a downward sloping curve. And savings, positively related. So if the rate of interest increases, you are induced, you save more because you can get more money from the bank, right? That's the assumption. So it's classical, straightforward. So you have a curve, an investment curve downward sloping, and the saving curve, which is upward sloping, supply and demand, right? Then he puts them together, and he gets the so-called IS curve, investment savings curve. Okay, that's the IS curve somewhere here. Blah 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 blah. This is IS. Okay, the IS curve must be some here. And here is the IS curve. IS. The paper here goes through a lot of blah blah, but that's basically it. This is the IS. Once you put together the savings and investment relations, you get this IS curve, which defines the savings and investment relation. Now we have to concentrate on the LM curve. Okay? So Hicks says, okay, how we move now from the marginal efficiency of investment schedule. He says, why this is not an equilibrium? Why the position may not be an full employment equilibrium, a general equilibrium? Why? So it's difficult to understand Keynes, but what I understand, he says, is that the Keynes postulates, which is true. Okay, Keynes postulates that the rate of interest, at some stage, the rate of interest becomes, erase, delete. That at some stage, investment becomes insensitive to the rate of interest. That even if you lower the rate of interest further, the rate of investment does not increase. Do you follow? So this is called liquidity trap. Liquidity trap. That is, there is a trap whereby wealth holders, essentially, prefer to hold money in liquid form rather than investing. This is called liquidity trap. People talk today about it's not liquidity trap today. Today it's crap. It's liquidity crap. It's not liquidity trap. Okay, today, but they make this association. The so-called zero bound. You know the zero bound. The Federal Reserve has been talking now. Mario is talking about increasing unlimited supply of money through purchases of bonds at what interest rate nearly zero. That's the zero bound, okay? And at the zero bound, even at the zero bound, investment did not bounce back, So some people say it's liquidity. That's not liquidity. I don't think that the economy today is in liquidity, but that's a different story. The economy today is in a capitalist crisis, which is a complete. So I'm back to to Charlie, Charlie. And so, so he says, okay, I understand that in Keynes there is a story whereby the investment becomes insensitive to the rate of interest. Okay? The rate of interest does not affect the level of investment, and what affects the level, what affects economic activity is purely, say, monetary policies. Okay, it's purely, sorry, not monetary, fiscal policies, not fiscal expenditure, direct expenditure by government. Okay, the role of the LM curve, which is the liquidity preference and demand for money curve. This is what LM curve is. The role of the LM curve, this is an equilibrium situation, there is an equilibrium situation, but the role of the LM curve is to precisely show the range of monetary policies versus the range of fiscal policies. Okay? So the LM curve is derived from the demand for money function. The demand for money function, okay, that's what it is. The liquidity preference, okay, function of the rate of interest and income is equal to the real value of money, money divided by prices. M is the money stock. Okay? You follow? That's the real value of money. Money divided by prices is the real money, right?
Sorry, can I ask you something? By monetary policies, you mean, for instance, emission of, or
Means
what
what?
would be the difference between the monetary policies and the physical ones?
Fiscal policy means that you are, monetary policy operates through the interest rate, and you increase and decline the supply of money. Through the interest rate, you operate. Fiscal policies is direct government expenditure. That's what fiscal policy is, okay? From the government budget. So the LM, see, the LM curve is in fact the curve which defines the conditions for the supply of money, okay? And the condition of the supply of money depends upon the liquidity preference, L, which is a function of the rate of interest and of income, yeah? So the stable part is a function of income, and the variable part is really a function of the rate of interest, okay? That's the case. Okay. Once we have all that, I switch off. Switch off. Okay. Once we have that, we can define a range, a policy range, whereby the LM curve is like this. Okay? So this is the LM curve. Here is the rate of interest. And here is, we can put the level of income. So, along, see this range here of the rate of interest, okay, up to this point here, only fiscal policies operate. You can see that. because if you reduce the rate of any deduction, that's below this, there is no sensitivity of the level of investment. So this range, it's liquidity trap range. But this range here, as you go up here, then the economy becomes more sensitive. So here you can move these curves essentially through fiscal policies. You can move the curve outward through fiscal policies. So this is the range of where the rate of interest no longer falls. Okay? Stop. That's the liquidity trap range. No longer falls. Therefore, to move the curves outward in order to get more investment, more employment, you can do it through fiscal policies, through net government deficit. From this point on, which means that as you grow toward full capacity, full employment, okay, from this point on, given depending on the smoothness of the curve, then you have to have a mix of fiscal and monetary policies. You follow? You start mixing a bit of in relation to the here the economy becomes interest rate sensitive. Okay, so you cannot just have fiscal policies, you must also have monetary policies. So you find the mix, and there is a point in which fiscal policies are completely ineffectual simply because you reached already full capacity, and therefore to have fiscal policy makes no sense. You're not increasing output and employment anymore. You stop there, and all what matters is the control. Here actually you become completely monetarist. You control the supply of money through the interest rate in order to prevent inflationary pressure. That's what happens in this field. That is the policy framework. The so-called ISLM model, which has been used as a sort of ritual, you know. It's a ritual. It's not that the government, etc., believed in that. It's the ritual within which they organize economists working with governments, they organize the policy. Now, Hicks only focused on, this is very important, he said, okay, unemployment in Keynes is due to liquidity trap. That's what he says, Hicks, right?
It's due to
liquidity trap. Unemployment, so basically Keynes is a neoclassicist. Hicks says he's a neoclassicist, but what he has a situation in which investment becomes insensitive to the rate of interest. That is, where the rate of interest cannot go any further down. And this is liquidity trap. Therefore, at this point, we need fiscal policies. Okay? So basically, Hicks said Keynes is neoclassical economics with liquidity trap in it. That's what Hicks did. That's 1937. In 1944, Franco Modigliani, who later got the Nobel Prize in economics, and it was, the three major Keynesian economists here, 3 or 4 major Keynesian economists in the United States, were Franco Modigliani, Paul Samuelson, Robert Solow, Paul Samuelson #1, Franco Modigliani, Robert Solow, and James Tobin. This is Keynesian economics in the United States. Tobin was at Yale, okay? Franco Modigliani says, but the Hicks story is, he wanted to strengthen the Keynesian neoclassical economy. Franco Modigliani said, look, Hicks' story limits, confines Keynes only to the liquidity trap. But of course, we have unemployment also when we are not in liquidity trap. So liquidity trap is an extreme case. Unemployment exists normally, okay? Therefore, and that's what Keynes argues, that unemployment is a normal case. That's the problem in Keynes. that unemployment is actually the persistent feature of a capitalist economy. Therefore, Modigliani says, the Hicks approach must be corrected. It cannot only be liquidity trap, it must be something else as well. So, what he brings in is the fact that wage contracts, this is really, he did not do it in order to make Keynes conservative, but this is actually what has turned the neoclassical Keynesians into really conservative people, because they basically argue that Keynes is a special case of neoclassical economics. That's what they really argue. So, Modigliani says wage contracts don't have the same flexibility as prices. Okay? So, if the price of an orange fluctuates, or if a supermarket, a department store, not supermarket for agricultural produce, but department store, gives you a discount and stuff like that. That doesn't happen in the wage framework. Wage contracts are fixed for a number of years. So prices of finished things can fluctuate, can be flexible, but wage contracts are not flexible. Do you follow me? Because you have a wage contract for, say, 1 year. And whereas during this year, prices can go up and down and so forth. So there is an asymmetry, to use a Stiglitz word. That time they did not use those words. But to use a contemporary word, there is an asymmetry between the wage contract and the price of a finished stuff, of the things that you buy. This asymmetry doesn't use Modigliani, the term. I am using it because I get influenced by the contemporary type of jargon. This asymmetry means that wages, listen to this, are not market clearing. You follow? Therefore, Modigliani brings in a completely neoclassical view of wages. Because if wages were perfectly flexible, then we are back in the neoclassical model. Everything is flexible, and we are back in the fact where monetary demand is independent from output, okay? Independent from, it's independent. Therefore, if everything is flexible and monetary demand stays the same, the falling prices increases output. We have seen it at the beginning of this moment. So he says, if wages were perfectly flexible, we would be in business. The system will be naturally tending to full employment. But wage contracts are of a different nature and cannot be but of a different nature. You cannot have a wage fluctuating from one day to the next because it's a contract. Whereas in the case of commodities, of finished goods, of underpants, socks, etc., prices can fluctuate, can be reduced tomorrow. You follow? As a result of that, wages are not market clearing. They don't clear the labor market. Wages do not equalize supply and demand for labor. Because of the different institutional nature of wage contracts. There's nothing you can do about it. This is a fact of life. It's not because, he says, not because there are unions, it's because the nature of the wage contract is such that it does not generate wage flexibility. And if it were to generate wage flexibility, it would create problems for production, right? Because then people would start moving about to find the best, etc., etc. Therefore, he says, wage contracts, by definition, create situations where labor markets do not clear. And this is why we have unemployment. Therefore, as long as we have unemployment, it's not only due to liquidity trap, it's due to this asymmetry between price flexibility in general, and wage contract. This means that there is room for fiscal and monetary policies, even outside the liquidity trap. So he actually wanted to strengthen the Keynesian case by arguing the case of wage rigidity. Do you follow me? Of wage rigidity. So in the case of Modigliani, and that becomes the rigid, fixed stickiness, sticky wages, rigid, not flexible. Rigid is like this, flexible is like this. So, wage rigidity becomes the second factor. In fact, in Modigliani, the most important factor for the persistence of unemployment, even outside liquidity trap conditions, and the rationale for fiscal and monetary policies. Okay, so that is what John Robinson called bastard Keynesianism. Yeah? Bastard because it's a hybrid of bit of Keynes, but really the marginal efficiency of investment curve Keynes, and the rest is neoclassical economics. A bit, fiddled with, but it's neoclassical economics. So John Robinson called it bastard Keynesianism. Okay? This Keynesianism became the policy reference. United States, number one. Britain, of course, as soon as they quickly colonized the United States, they colonized Britain, intellectually what I'm saying, academically, because the British were not on that line, not that much, but universities pretty quickly, by the end of the 50s, early 60s, they were essentially colonized by the United States, and now they are just satellites, they are just still satellites of American universities, except few cases, some few cases. SOAS is one case which is not a satellite, or Leeds is not a satellite. The Judge Institute in Cambridge is not a satellite, but very few places, Otherwise, they are just parroting. Oxford is a complete satellite of the United States. They still think they are important, but they are not. All the research program is essentially written in, they just copy MIT, Harvard, Stanford, whatever. It's all United States. And so that has become the neoclassical package. And what is the story of the Paul Samuelson is the real guru ideologue of neoclassical economics, put it very well. He put it very well. It was always very clear about this. The neoclassical package, this has got nothing to do with policy. Policies were not decided on this basis, okay? Policies were decided on other things, on other criteria, not on that thing. But then this kind of ideological intellectual package was, look, we do not need what? We don't need socialism. But socialism meant Soviet Union or China, and or both bad anyway, bad. Okay, so we don't need socialism. We have everything remains private capitalist system here. There's nothing public. We have the cockpit, like in a plane, the cockpit, right? And we have the buttons. So the buttons is the ISLM, okay? The fiscal and monetary policies. Because here, government does not own, only spends. The government spends and taxes, There is no government-owned corporation, so to speak. There is no nationalization. You don't have to nationalize. So you can have a market economy, that is private property economy, with government intervention, but not at the level like it was in Britain, like it was here in Italy, like it was in France, still in Italy now, still the largest sector, the largest sector is still public owned in Italy, okay? Like it's called Finmeccanica, which is the largest part of the mechanical metal industry in Italy is public, is not private. They are now what they want to privatize it now. But say all the Selenia, which is Italy is the producer of, in the NATO division of labor of NATO, produces missiles, ship to air, air to ship missiles, okay? Yeah? That's produced by Selenia, which is a company, Selenia. This company, Selenia, is part of Finmeccanica, which means it is state-owned. That's what it means. So, France also, you know, Airbus is state-owned, with all participation, etc. Essentially, what they call Airbus, it's actually Airbus, is state-owned. This type of state ownership in Britain had state-owned industry in steel. They nationalized, Labour Party nationalized the steel industry in 1945 and so forth. That in America never happened. When they nationalized something like Amtrak, which is the train, okay, they nationalized Amtrak because Amtrak went bankrupt. Just to rescue it, they nationalized Penn Central. That was not Amtrak, there was Penn Central that went bankrupt, and the American government in the early 70s nationalized, took it to make it. I think that now it is, they also, it's so bankrupt, the entire railway system, that no one will buy it, so they cannot privatize it. So in the US. Then, but otherwise, there was no policy of nationalization for development, for creating public, that is state ownership. Europe followed that, okay? It was Europe. After the Second World War, essentially, and some of the European countries, not all, essentially Italy, France, and Britain, that's where they had these nationalizations, and a bit Holland as well. So, the argument by some people is we don't need all that sort of stuff, we don't need that. We have the policy framework, which is a completely private economy, but with government intervention at the level of fiscal policy, that is the freedom to run a deficit, and at the level of monetary policy. You follow? That was the role of this sort of policy framework. This policy framework is cast in terms of the short run. You can see it's short run. It's not long run. It doesn't tell you what the growth rate is going. What is the growth rate of the economy? It doesn't tell you. It only the policy framework is only aimed at achieving full employment in the short run. You follow? It's how to get to full employment. So the issue is still that of the depression. Is still the issue of the depression. Let's get out of the depression. Like the issues today as well. Everybody says, oh, we need some growth, let's get out. It's the same thing. So the aim is that short-term framework in which you have policies aimed at attaining full employment, okay? And this is the neoclassical the neoclassical case, where you keep the neoclassical view of the economy essentially, and you make the Keynesian case a special case of the neoclassical framework. Once you are back into full employment, they actually say that. You are back into full employment, you are in the neoclassical world. Perfect competitive general equilibrium. This means that in the Hicks-Modigliani framework, the long run is neoclassical, is competitive equilibrium. This is what it means. You follow? It means that if you ask them, interview, how is the economy? now. Oh, the economy now has 6, 7, 8, 10% unemployment. That's bad, okay? Okay, how do we get to full employment? Oh, the full employment, we get in fiscal, monetary, we sort of play a bit around with those curves, and we have a bit fiscal, a bit monetary policies, and they can disagree on parameters, they can disagree on econometric estimates and stuff like that, but basically they would say, okay, that's what we have to do. The American Keynesians. The only Keynesians that matter, then nothing else matters. So, then say, but in what in the long run? What in the long run? Oh, in the long run, we'll all be fine, because in the long run, competitive equilibrium will prevail. So the belief is that there is short period impediments, short period rigidities, okay? But in the long run, you get very flexible, okay? You are flexible and you get to full employment, everything is, prices are flexible, you get to general equilibrium. That's the view, okay? So how do we link the short run and the long run? We have to how do we make the link? How?
The wagers contracts.
No, let me tell you, it's kind of interesting story. It's not a bit of theater we are getting. And so, the link between the short run and the long run is produced entirely at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, between essentially, with an input from LSE, which I will explain in a second, the some raw material came from London School of Economics, from LSE, in the late 50s. So it's somewhere that happened between the late 50s and the late 60s, mid 60s. Between, let's say, from the second half of the 50s to the late 60s. That's how, as I tell you now, we have an hour, and I tell you how this was established. In order to understand how this was established, I have to go back a bit. So we go back in reverse. So now I will just tell you the story in words. Do you want me, or do you want the math? Do you want the mathematics, or do you want
mathematics?
The story. You want the story?
Yes.
Because the mathematics is very quick, you know? It's very quick. Okay. But I'll do the mathematics next. I'll do also the mathematics. Don't worry, I'll do the mathematics. It's mathematics. Okay. Keynes also was in the short run. First, because he did not believe in the long run. In the long run, we're all dead, expectations, we don't know, all this angst about, we don't know, who knows what's going to happen in the future, etc., etc. So he was, look, we don't know what's going to be tomorrow. Let's discuss the things now. Okay, so we believe in the short. But there is a problem in the short, in this thing. That if you stay only in the short run, you see, how does investment appear? Investment, when you are in this sort of stuff, investment appears as expenditure, you see. If I write the role of investment is expenditure. You understand? It's effective demand. You spend by ordering machinery or by building a bridge. You build a bridge, and therefore you hire the workers to build the bridge. If you say investment plus government expenditure. So if investment doesn't move, you use government expenditure, you build the bridge. But you don't do it like they do it, say, around Naples and stuff like that, where they build a bridge which gets nowhere, there's no road connected to it, nothing, and most of the money has gone elsewhere, okay? Has been pocketed by the Camorra and all this stuff. So you build a real bridge, okay, that is useful. important point, useful. What does it mean? It means that once the bridge is built, or the railway line is built, or the new machinery has been ordered, built, so when it comes in, it's no longer expenditure, it's additional productive capacity. You follow me? If you have, if you build for Keynesian purposes, you build a railway line. The more, as when you spend the money to put the tracks, to hire the workers, to lay the programs out, the project, etc., that's Keynesian expenditure. You follow? Once you put the tracks, you build the railway line, you need trains to run, and you need demand for the capacity of the railway line. This means that when it is being built, the railway line is demand. When it is finished, it is additional capacity. You need trains to run, and you need the demand that would justify the running of the trains, good trains or passenger trains along the railway line. So investment as expenditure generates more demand. It's a more effective demand as an expenditure, because you are ordering stuff to build the final factory, the final. Once all that is finished, the factory must produce, okay? And therefore it requires demand for its production. You understand? Which means that investment has a dual aspect. Investment as expenditure is demand. Investment as machinery, new fixed capital is productive capacity. You follow? These two aspects. And if you build productive capacity which is not going to be utilized, okay, in an economic system with some kind of economic rationality, this means the next time investment will not be sustained. You follow? Because why? If you are not using that factory, or you can do like there was a cartoon. There used to be in the Soviet Union. There used to be I think it was a weekly satirical newspaper called Crocodile. Yeah. And they always showed exactly this sort of thing. They showed, for instance, factory producing steel and putting the steel all around the factory, because this steel was not being sold anywhere. It was just, they were given by the plant, they were given an objective, a target, so much output, so many millions of tons or 100,000 of tons, and then they produced the tons, but no one showed up to pick up those things. And they would put steel around the factory. So the Crocodile used to make fun of this. Okay? And so this means that you produce without being used. Okay? You can do that. I'm not saying that, but it's not sustainable after so much. In extreme emergency, you can do that. Under emergency situations, you can do it. Like the Swedes did. The Swedes did in the 70s. When there was the crisis, there was a crisis of the 70, oil inflation crisis, etc., etc. The Swedes, the Swedish government financed the accumulation of stocks, of inventories in firms. So if Volvo produced cars that were not sold, then the Swedish government paid for the cost of that car, and the cars were kept in the parking lots of Volvo company and so forth. So you can, under extreme, and that was a conservative, not social democrat. You under extreme condition, but this is not a normal state. So under normal condition, if you produce something, if you build something which entails extra capacity, which generates extra capacity, and if you don't have the demand for this extra capacity, then investment will plunge, will fall. And this This means you are back in unemployment. Okay? This was understood by two people. In 1939, a guy in England, Roy Harrod, which is not the same as the shop, right? Egypt Harrod in Oxford, 1959. Yeah, 1959. And in the United States, at MIT, a guy called Xavier Doman. So his original name is not Doman, his original name is Domarovsky or something, you know, and then he cut it down to Doman, not to make it too complicated for the Americans. And that was MIT 1946. Together, not together, they didn't write together, they wrote in two different instances, but together in the literature, these two papers became the Harrod-Doman model. Okay? Doman. In fact, once I did meet Doman, he's dead now, but he didn't die long ago. Growth model. That's the growth model, which was then attached to the Modigliani Higgs. Short term, the long term became the Harrod-Doman growth model. But I have to make it more specific. In different, with different nuances, with different, different nuances, Harrod and Doman essentially said that pointed out that investment, so you have to, the Keynesian relation is I plus C, and you have Y equal 1 over, now I have S. Remember that S is 1 minus C times I. That's the Keynesian relation. But there is another relation, that investment, when it is brought into, when it is finished, when you finish, investment means that the factory orders a new truck, for instance. When the truck comes, when the truck is delivered, then the factory has to fill the truck with the goods to ship. So they must have the demand. So the truck means additional capacity for the company that has ordered the truck. You understand this? So, investment is also additional stock of capital, additional capacity. Okay? Therefore, there must be, when you reach full employment, you must make sure that the capacity that will continue to exist after you reach full employment, once you reach full employment, that the output that comes out, okay, among which there will be capital goods, additional machinery, and stuff like that, is consistent with the maintenance, with the capability of keeping full employment over time. You understand that? Because otherwise, you can overproduce the capital stock, you can overproduce machinery if your investment is too high, and this means that you generate an overproduction of capital goods and you generate a slump. Then investment will fall, there will be unemployment and so forth. Okay? Yeah?
Just remind us why S is equal to 1 minus 6. S is savings, right?
Yeah, it's the percentage because, yeah, S is 1 minus C because then I erase, okay? C is equal to C over Y. That's the consumption propensity to consume. Okay? Propensity to consume. So you put this here, you have Y equal I plus C times Y, right? Then this means Y 1 minus C equal I. Well, 1 minus C, if C is how much is consumed, the percentage, 1 minus C is how much is saved.
Says.
Yeah, so that's S. That's small s, huh? Small s. So, therefore, remember that I in the Keynesian frameworks is always equal to S. So, in different ways, both Harold and Thomas pointed out that the growth rate in the economy, every economy, industrialized, we're talking about industrialized economies, will have, at some stage, they will have a growth rate which is the full employment growth rate. And they defined the full employment growth rate as the growth rate of population, L, small l, labor, plus the growth rate of productivity, P, pi, okay? So, that would be beyond that, no matter whatever they were criticized immediately by not explaining where productivity comes from. But their objective was not that. The objective was saying, look, there is a limit, there is an upper bound, there is a limit beyond which the economy cannot grow. And the limit beyond which the economy cannot grow is determined by the growth rate of population. It does not matter whether this growth of population is natural, demographic, or by immigration. You follow me? It's growth rate of population plus growth rate of productivity. You cannot produce, you cannot grow more than what you can produce. That's very simple, okay? It's very simple. And the limit to the growth is determined by demographic, by population growth on one hand and productivity growth on that. That's not. So they came out with the view, you see. So that the growth rate, I will not derive it tomorrow, I'll just give you the formula. The growth rate of the equilibrium growth rate, or full employment growth rate, they called it natural growth rate. Natural, they go back to some classical terminology. Natural GN, natural growth rate, is to be equal to the relationship between the saving ratio, small s, okay, small s, and V, where V is the capital output ratio. So there should be a ratio which is equal, so let's call it the full employment level, which is equal to the growth rate of population, okay? Should be this ratio here, should be equal to the growth rate of population. This is called the Harold-Doma growth model, okay? So once you reach full employment, you should be able to move on to the Harold-Doma growth path. And that's not easy because it's not so straightforward. It's not so simple. Say that you are a country like, can be for instance, Korea, South Korea. It can be a country like Japan as well. Let's say Japan, if Japan reaches full employment, which more or less they can reach very quickly, considering, officially they show that they have only 4% unemployment. But this is because they don't consider women. It's true, the statistics don't consider women. Women are supposed to be married after so many, after 25, 30, etc. And they don't consider also the informal sector. The informal sector, that is to say, a sector which doesn't have regular contracts, which is quite big in Japan, they don't consider it. So if you consider all that, the unemployment rate is quite high, it's 8 to 10%. It's not a small, lower. They only consider certain type of employment to its main tenured employment. That's what they treat, they measure. And therefore they come up always with a very low rate of unemployment, obviously. But otherwise, if you consider unemployment, including the informal sector, including the fact that women that would be of working age are not working and so forth, when they exit the labor force, when they are no longer working, they are not calculated in the statistics, then unemployment in Japan will not be all that different from what it is in Europe, say average 8 to 10% unemployment. So they could reach. Imagine now Japan reaching full employment with the stock of capital it has now, right? So because a lot of the stock of capital in Japan is not utilized, because they can produce by far more than what they are producing now. Huh? So a great deal of that stock of capital among the capitalist countries, Japan is one of those countries where consumption percentage relatively to national income is relatively low. Okay, it's not very high relatively to, say, United States. Percentage of consumption over GDP is 70%. In the case of Japan, it's barely above 50. It's 55%. It's 55%. Okay, consumption over GDP. So this means they have an enormous productive capacity in investment sector, in the capital goods sector. They are very big productive capacities in the capital goods sector. Do you follow me?
Sorry, can you explain again the parts of the natural growth?
Well, yes, what I'm trying to explain now. So when assume that Japan reaches full capacity in the economy and full employment, this means that next year they can produce a deluge of steel, a deluge of machinery, and this stuff has to find employment, has to find absorption, it has to be absorbed by the economy. You follow me? So they will produce more machines that they can have applications for. You follow? So this what defines, okay, the SV relation. That is to say, even the savings is equal to investment. This means that it's not so easy to get this. This is not easy. It's not a foregone conclusion. This equation is what we would like it to be, but it does not necessarily materialize, because you can actually overshoot. You can have a situation in which the actual, the S over V, which your productive capacity enables you to achieve, is actually greater than Gn. You follow? So this means that you go into over-accumulation. So this means that in order to have, once you reach full employment, you have to have a transition to the natural growth level. If you do not have a transition to the natural growth level, you are back into unemployment. You can also be lower. Huh? I mean, for instance, a country like an intermediate industrially developed country. Okay, for instance, Greece. Greece is less than intermediate. It's not industrially developed at all. Okay. But this has actually one advantage of not having population growth. It's negative population growth. Population growth, except for immigration, but population growth in Greece is not. So give me a country which is intermediate, not so, Argentina can be one, okay? And in the case of, I mean, if they reach full employment now, well, they may actually not have enough capital goods. Investment sector may not be strong enough to generate the growth necessary to keep full employment over time, okay? Because the industrialization, they had, it's basically a similar situation to Australia. Their industrialization has been strong in some periods in the past, but in the last 30 years, industrialization has actually gone down. So they cannot sustain physically the growth rate. So you can have labor. But in industrial advanced countries, usually it is this relation that operates. It is this, okay? So you must envision a transition to the growth rate, to the natural growth rate. So what happened in MIT, in the mid-50s, mid-late 50s, is that they found the transition to the natural growth rate. They developed, and that was Bob Solow growth model, Robert Solow growth model, about which I'll speak. Maybe I'll speak now. What happened at MIT in the mid-50s, in 1956, is the development of a growth model which exactly allows you to undertake this transition. Okay? So what you have therefore first in the American macroeconomic thing is, first you have the neoclassical Keynesians, ISLM, second, you have the Harold Domar last Solow. Solow is still alive, you can talk to him. She Joseph has said these things about you. The Solow growth model. And three, you have the Phillips curve. Have you heard of the Phillips curve? The trade-off between the Phillips curve. Phillips curve. That comes from LSE. Phillips curve. Okay. So what does Solow do to the Harold? So we have seen that the problem in the Harold growth model is that GN, by and large, will be different from the SV, which can be obtained when you get to full employment, okay? So the natural growth rate, which will be the full employment growth rate of population plus productivity, GN, being GN being equal to labor growth, population growth, and productivity, these things are likely to be different. Okay? So, in Harold and Domar, they are definitely different. Okay? Why? Because Harold and Domar take S and V constant. So if S and V are constant, well, only by probability, only by chance, you will get the S and V at full employment equal to the rate of growth, which will be the equilibrium full employment growth rate. Okay? Solow comes in 1956 and says, we can find a solution. The solution, that's what made him famous, 1956. And he got the Nobel Prize as a result of that model, essentially. It's the Solow growth model, which is the model used in textbooks. So, he says, listen, what is S here? S is S over Y. Okay, we keep the Keynesian assumption. Keynes kept S as given, okay? So we stay in the Keynesian framework. We keep the Keynesian assumption of given propensity to save. But V, what is V? V is the capital output ratio. Okay, it's the amount of capital necessary to produce 1 unit of output. This is a technological thing. It's the relationship between, in fact, it depends upon the relation between capital and labor. That's the thing. So what Solow does, he transformed this equation into a Wicksell production function. And that is, Solow growth model is nothing but growth, the growth of the economy, okay, is the physical growth of the economy is a function big F. Okay. So let's start here. He takes the Wickelsian function of output equal function of capital and labor, with all the properties of Wicksell. And he makes this function, he transforms this function into the Harold, he puts it into the Harold-Domar function. Okay? That's what he does. So, the Harold-Domar function in Solow becomes a Wicksell function. The output is a function of capital and labor. And that is then used to show the transition. So what happens is this. Assume, to just tell you in words, assume that the economy, when it gets to full employment, it's so heavily capitalized, so heavily, the capital goods, the machine, the investment sector are so big that the next time around, the next round, it produces too many capital goods relatively to the requirement for full employment. In other words, you are producing empty factories, empty bridges, and etc. Too much of that, okay? Too much of that. And Solow says, well, that is true only if the capital output ratio stays fixed. But if the capital output ratio becomes flexible, this is not necessary. This need not be the case. And how does it become flexible? Exactly by the virtue of the Wicksell mechanism. That is to say that you produce too much capital. So the capital that you produce, or rather the supply of capital, so we're back into Wicksell. The supply of capital is too much relatively to the growth rate, to the equilibrium growth rate, to the full employment growth rate. Well, Solow says, if you introduce diminishing marginal productivity, see, this Wickelsian function is diminishing marginal productivity, you should expect that the marginal productivity of capital falls. So it's true that you have produced more, you have an increase in the supply of capital. It's true, you have increase in the physical capital, more machinery and stuff like that. But the marginal productivity of that capital has fallen, so that capital becomes less productive because the marginal productivity has fallen. this also means that the price of capital will fall, okay? This means that the technique of production in the economy will go up. It will become more capital intensive. Lower marginal productivity, lower price, capital intensity goes up. This means that K over Y will go up, that the capital output ratio will go up. You follow? That's what his argument is. So he says, look, if we use a neoclassical production function and we put it into the Harrod and Doma, which did not use a neoclassical production function, then we get the transition. If the economy produces too much of capital, then the marginal productivity of capital will fall. That's a long run. So under perfect competition, under Wicksell type of perfect competition, then the marginal productivity of capital will go down, the price of capital will go down, and the average technique of production will move to higher capital intensity. You follow? In your classical world, higher capital intensity means lower rate of interest, lower marginal productivity, lower price of capital. You follow that? So Solow says, look, the solution is in the theory, is in neoclassical production function theory. That's what Solow says. That became the Solow growth model. So in the short run, to recapitulate, in the short run you have the Modigliani-Hicks approach, where you fiddle with the trade-off between monetary and fiscal policies. The short run means given stock of capital in the economy, the existing factors, etc. Some of them are not used because there is unemployment, there is lack of effective demand, lack of market. Therefore, you boost the economy through either fiscal or monetary policies according to the circumstances, and you reach full employment with the existing stock of capital, existing number of factories, existing number of buildings. So that's the short run. When you come to the longer run, you must take into account the new machinery that comes in, which has been generated through investment, the new buildings, the new bridges, the new railway lines, which means more capacity, and you have to measure it in relation to the full employment growth rate. Not a problem, says Solow, because in the long run, competitive markets will prevail through the principle of substitution. Therefore, if you overproduce in terms of supply of capital, in reality, in the long run, you do not overproduce, because what will happen is that capital will become cheaper as a result of the diminishing marginal productivity and the equilibrium relation between the diminishing marginal productivity, the price of capital, and the rate of increase. You follow? So we have the transition in the longer run, we have the transition to full general equilibrium of Wicksell time, of neoclassical time. You understand? So Solow gives you the transition. That's it. Here is the transition. So we don't have to worry that much. In the short run we have to worry, in the long run we don't have to worry. Last thing in the piece is, okay, but when we do all these sort of things, how do we deal with the problem of price inflation? If we get to full employment, we'll have inflation, right? So this idea, because workers' wages, bargaining power is more in favor of labor, and so we may get inflation. So they developed at MIT an idea, so at MIT, an idea that there is a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. That there is a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. This is the result of the policy transformation mutation of a work done by a guy called, I think Arthur. Hi Arthur, I think it doesn't sound Arthur. Hi Arthur, I don't think it was Arthur. Phillips, I think it was Arthur Phillips. Hi Arthur doesn't sound good to me. But anyway, his name was Phillips, for sure, Phillips. Well, it's Arthur, I always stick in my mind Arthur, but I'm not sure if he was Arthur. Phillips is well known in macroeconomics, the Phillips curve. Phillips did, it's A.W. Phillips, A.W. Phillips. Phillips was a guy who just walked from New Zealand to England. He walked, yeah, through Siberia. So China and Siberia, he walked until he got to England, yeah. He was an electrical engineer he was a New Zealander who became electrical engineer and worked in a mining company in Australia. And then he walked through China and Siberia to England. And in London, at LSE, he got a PhD in economics. Well, it happens in life. He was also taken prisoner during the war by the Japanese, etc. So in fact, he died young. He died 65. Young, I mean, relatively to him. So he died in, I think he died in 1975. But he became very famous. He became very famous because he undertook a study on the relationship between wages and unemployment, variations in wages and unemployment. Okay? A statistical study in British data, 1864-1950. It was published in the journal Economica, which is the journal, it's a very important journal in Britain. It's the journal of the London School of Economics. Economics, okay? So, that study is phenomenal. Because it's truly very good, not percentages. He calibrated the data, etc. And without, he was an electrical engineer, electrical engineer who used the mathematics and the engineering conception in order to then get a study economics. Which means that he knew nothing about Charlie Marx, nothing, okay? And yet he comes out with exactly Marx, the Third Army of Labor. He never knew about it. I think he died without knowing about it, right? But it's Marx, because what he points out in the Phillips curve, what he points out is that there is a relationship, inverse relationship between wages and unemployment. Simple. Okay, so that in the history, statistical history of Britain, you can find very clearly, especially until the Great Depression, especially until 1930, until 1929, 1930, you can find that unemployment is high, wages tend to be low. And when unemployment is low, wages tend to be high. Okay? That's Marx. That's the Industrial Reserve Army of Labor of Charlie. That's exactly it. He limited himself to just studying the statistical relation. He did not infer any policy formulation. Later, a Canadian economist at, I think, University of Waterloo. I think it was the University of Waterloo. Called Richard Lipsey, also. He said, look, but here we can have, a few years later, because the paper was published in 1958.
Phillips 58, Phillips 60.
Yeah. Richard Lipsey said, look, we can infer here a policy element, okay? Because then we can say that if wages are high at full employment, there is an element of inflation which is due to cost inflation, right? If wages are high, cost. So inflation is cost. So Phillips focused on the element of inflation which are demand driven and cost pushed, okay? So if wages are high, okay, so if you have a lot of demand for raw materials, and raw material prices go up, and therefore oil prices, whatever, and then you get inflation, that's demand inflation, not cost inflation, right? Because the growth rate, the demand for those products is. If you have, by contrast, a high wage level, and firms can pass on to the final prices the higher cost of production, the higher level of wages, then this is a cost inflation. You understand? So Phillips had this element. Well, all that was wrapped up by Summerson and Solow. Summerson and Solow, they wrote a paper which they presented at the American Economic Association meeting in 1960, in which they transformed essentially the Phillips curve from a statistical relationship into a policy tool. And by saying that you can have a